I have spent my life learning one simple lesson about crises. The most dangerous moment is not always when people are shouting. Very often, the most dangerous moment is when everyone starts pretending that nothing has changed. That is what I see. Now, the talks did not restart. That is the story. Not the public excuse about travel, not the jokes about cost, not the line that one side has all the cards and the others. Those are the words people use when they want to make a failed process look like a deliberate choice. The real story is that the negotiation track has broken, the blockade remains, the war has not formally restarted, and the oil artery of the world is still being squeezed while every government involved waits for someone else to blink. When a man tells you he canceled a diplomatic trip because the flight was too long and too expensive, do not stop at the sentence. Ask what the sentence is hiding. No serious government avoids a war ending negotiation because the airplane ride is inconvenient. Planes are cheap compared with aircraft carriers. Hotel rooms are cheap compared with oil shocks. Diplomats are cheap compared with a global recession. So the reason was not travel. The reason was leverage. Washington looked at the Iranian position and concluded that the other side was not ready to surrender what America wanted surrendered. Tehran looked at the American position and concluded that America was still asking for the kind of deal that would look like capitulation at home. Pakistan tried to keep the process alive, but Iran no longer trusted Pakistan as a neutral table. The Americans wanted to say the Iranians were still coming. The Iranians wanted to say the Americans had already moved the terms. That is not a negotiation. That is a negotiation corpse being dressed up for the cameras. And while that corpse sits on the table, the Strait of Hormuz remains the real living thing in this story. Most people hear the word blockade and imagine something clean. A line on a map, a naval order, ship stop, ships allowed through, pressure applied, result achieved. Markets are not that clean, wars are not that clean, shipping lanes are not that clean. A blockade is not only a military action, it is a financial instrument. It prices risk into every barrel of oil that moves, every insurance policy written on a tanker, every cargo schedule that a factory in Asia depends on, every airline fuel contract, every diesel delivery, every government budget that assumes energy will remain available at a tolerable price. The mistake Washington may be making is thinking the blockade only applies pressure on Iran. It does not. It applies pressure on everyone. It applies pressure on Asian importers that need the Gulf. It applies pressure on Europe, which may not buy as much crude directly from the region, but depends on refined products and global price stability. It applies pressure on American consumers who do not care about Hormuz until gasoline prices begin to behave like a tax nobody voted for. It applies pressure on the president who ordered it. That is why this limbo is not stable. A war that restarts has a terrible clarity. A peace agreement has a difficult clarity, but this middle zone, where the shooting pauses while the economic weapon keeps working, creates a different kind of danger. It gives every actor enough time to prepare for the next move and not enough certainty to trust the current one. Iran can use the pause to repair tunnels, move equipment, lay mines, reorganize command structures, or reposition proxies. America can use the pause to keep squeezing the oil flow and wait for internal Iranian divisions to worsen. Israel can use the pause to keep pressing in Lebanon and search for a way to make the wider confrontation unavoidable. Again, markets can use the pause to pretend there is still a diplomatic path until the missing barrels force them to reprice reality. That is the pressure ledger. I use that phrase because in a crisis, every side thinks it owns assets, but the real question is whether those assets produce more pressure on the enemy or more pressure on yourself. America's assets are obvious. It has overwhelming military power. It has a blockade. It has Iranian infrastructure under threat. It has a president willing to say that Iran can call any time because America has the cards. Iran's assets are less pleasant to discuss, but they are real. It has the geography. It has mines. It has missiles. It has the ability to keep normal traffic through Hormuz from becoming normal. Again, it has the ability to threaten regional oil infrastructure if its own infrastructure is hit. And most importantly, it has the political reality that a regime fighting for survival may accept pain that a normal market model would call irrational. That last card is the one too many analysts misunderstand. Business people are trained to assume that pain changes behavior. Raise the cost and the other side makes a deal. That is often true in commerce. It is not always true in politics. When the cost of surrender looks greater than the cost of endurance, pressure does not produce compromise. It produces hardening. I have seen this in markets. A company with a weak balance sheet will sometimes sell a good asset because it has no choice. But a founder who believes selling means losing control may do something far more destructive. He may borrow more, hide the problem longer, attack critics, and gamble the entire enterprise on one final turn. Countries can behave the same way. Iran is not a normal company. It is a wounded regime with a strategic waterway, a damaged military, internal factions, and a government that cannot accept a deal that looks like complete surrender. That makes the crisis more dangerous, not less. Trump's language that Iran has no military left and no leaders left may be politically useful. But if a country truly has no coherent leadership, that is not an argument for calm. It is an argument for caution. The most predictable enemy is often the one with a clear command structure. The more fractured the leadership, the more likely it is that different factions act in different directions. That is why the collapse of the Islamabad track matters so much. Pakistan was not merely a location. It was supposed to be the bridge between pressure and outcome, if both sides could sit under one mediation structure. The blockade could be presented as a temporary tool rather than an open-ended war measure. Iran could seek relief, America could seek concessions, Pakistan could claim a regional stabilizing role. But once Iran began saying Pakistan was not impartial, the table changed. A mediator only works when both sides believe the mediator can carry a message both ways. If Tehran believes Pakistan only repeats Washington's demand, then Islamabad is no longer a bridge. It is a hallway that leads to the same locked door. That is why Iran's foreign minister moving through Islamabad, Muscat, and Moscow matters. It tells you Iran is looking for another map. Oman matters because it has been a serious channel before. Moscow matters because Russia does not see this crisis the way Washington does. Russia sees leverage, oil prices, American distraction, and a chance to stand beside Iran without having to carry the full cost of Iran's decisions. Pakistan matters less if it cannot persuade America to move or persuade Iran that the table is neutral. A country that believes one table is stacked against it does not stop negotiating. It searches for another table. Now, consider the Iranian threat about infrastructure. Iran's message was simple. If its oil wells or infrastructure are damaged because of the blockade, then countries supporting the aggressor will face multiplied damage on similar infrastructure. That is not just anger. It is a deterrent aimed at the Gulf. Iran is not only speaking to America, it is speaking to the countries that host bases, provide logistics, supply political cover, or quietly hope America can handle the problem without making it their problem. Iran is saying, if you let this pressure campaign use your geography, then your geography becomes part of the war. That is how a regional crisis spreads. Not always through one grand declaration. Often, it spreads through a sequence of smaller, each one defensible in isolation, until the full picture becomes indefensible. A blockade here, a canceled negotiation there, a leaked report about talks that were never really scheduled, a minefield that may take months to clear. A Lebanese strike that violates the spirit of a broader pause. A threat against oil wells. A trip to Moscow, a market rumor released at just the right time before oil futures open, individually. Each one looks like noise together. They look like a system losing its stabilizers. That is the part ordinary investors and ordinary families should understand. The oil shock does not need to be immediate to be real. A shortage can hide inside transit times, inventories, insurance contracts, refinery schedules, and government reserve releases. By the time the average person sees it at the pump, the decision that caused it may already be weeks old. A tanker does not teleport from the Gulf to Asia. A refinery does not instantly replace one crude grade with another. A government does not refill emergency reserves by wishing, and a market does not always panic when the first domino falls. Sometimes it waits until the missing supply reaches the visible part of the chain. That is why this conflict can feel strangely quiet while becoming more dangerous. The war has not resumed in the dramatic sense. No one has announced a giant new campaign. But the economic war continues, the blockade continues, the mines remain a variable, the oil that should be moving is not moving. Normally, the diplomatic table is broken, the alternative diplomatic routes are being tested, and every side is speaking as if time favors them. Time rarely favors everyone. America thinks time increases pressure on Iran. Iran thinks time increases pressure on oil markets and America's allies. Israel thinks time may create another opening to restart the military campaign. Russia thinks time keeps America tied down. Asian buyers think time will force someone to reopen the route. Markets think time means a deal is still possible. Someone is wrong. Maybe several of them are wrong. That is why I would not watch the press conferences first. I would watch the physical system, our tankers leaving, our insurers writing normal coverage, our mines being cleared or merely avoided, are Gulf producers moving barrels through alternate pipelines, or are they quietly accepting reduced flows? Are airlines and refiners beginning to bid aggressively for product? Are Asian buyers paying premiums that tell you they do not trust the headlines? Follow those numbers and you will know more than the speeches can tell you. I do not know whether this ends in a sudden deal, a renewed war, or a long grind that slowly taxes the world economy. Nobody honest knows that today. But I do know this. A canceled negotiation is not harmless when a blockade remains in place. A ceasefire is not peace when one side is still squeezing. The other side's oil artery, and a country with mines in the water, still has cards even if its enemy says otherwise. The most dangerous phrase in this crisis is not something Iran said. It is the phrase, "We have all the cards in business." The man who says that too often usually has more exposure than he admits. In diplomacy, it can be even worse, because the other side may decide that if it has no cards left, it has no reason to play carefully. That is where we are now. The formal talks have stalled. The real negotiation has moved from the conference room to the shipping lane. And until Hormuz is truly open, until the blockade is lifted or converted into a settlement, and until both sides can describe a deal they can survive politically, this is not over. It is only being priced too calmly. And calm prices, in my experience, are sometimes the market's way of telling you it has not yet understood the bill.